Mackenzie and I are coming to you guys from Kearney this morning, so I do apologize for kind of the like odd lighting on my end. But we will go ahead and get started. We are going to talk a little bit about that PBIS, that pyramid, and SEBL alignment today. If you guys would like, you guys can go ahead and put your name, your school, your ESU, your position just in the chat for us, just kind of as a little attendance. As far as introduction, so I'm Jill Gunther. I'm one of the social emotional behavioral learning specialists with Nebraska MTSS, and I serve regions 3 and 4, which are ESUs 1, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, and 17. And I'll let Mackenzie introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Mackenzie Rydell. I am also an SEBL specialist. I serve regions 1 and 2, so ESUs 4, 5, and 6, and LPS, and also ESUs 2, 3, and OPS.
Good morning, I'm Emily Arkfeld. I round up this team of 3 as a third SEBL specialist, and I serve region 5, ESUs 13, 15, and 16.
Perfect, thanks ladies. Next up here, we just wanted to give kind of an overview of our roles as social emotional behavioral learning specialists. So we have a little bit of information there. There is also a link that will take you to a video recording, just again, kind of sharing some information about social emotional behavioral learning and kind of what our role is within Nebraska MTSS, how we can help support you just around that exploration and planning of SEBL, really working to support the wellness and self-care of adults, so the educators within your building, as well as that student core and that student tiered SEBL. To just kind of get us going this morning, so our welcoming inclusion activity. So just as a reminder, so CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, has put together these 3 signature practices, which are the welcoming inclusion activities, those engaging strategies, and then optimistic closures. This is just a great way to really kind of build those connections, build that sense of community, those relationships among groups, whether you're doing it within your classroom, whether you're doing it during like a professional learning or professional development, a meeting with staff, whatever it might be. It really is just a great way to get us going and kind of also take a little pulse of the group that is participating, or build those relationships. So our welcoming inclusion for this morning is, how charged are you today? Just kind of how are you feeling today? And so using the annotate function on Zoom, so if you have never done that before, if you go to the top of your screen, you can click on the view options button and then scroll down to annotate. You can do like a text box, so you could put in your initials just based on the, just kind of the charge level that you would rate yourself as today. Or you can also click on the stamp and there's a few options there. So like a star, a heart, a check mark, whatever you would like to use. So we'll let you guys go ahead and do that, and you can just kind of put it above the charge level that you would rate yourself as today. So a lot of us kind of right in the middle or feeling pretty decently charged this morning. So that is great. For those of you that are kind of like in the orange, maybe we need a little extra cup of coffee this morning to kind of get us going. But again, just kind of a great way to take the pulse of the group. But then also thinking about, if you're doing this within your classroom, kind of what you're going to do to move forward. If you have a lot of students that maybe would be in the first or second kind of charge level, maybe it's a quick little get up and moving activity, something to just kind of get our brains awake and up and going. Maybe it's a check-in to kind of see what it is that's making them feel a little less charged today, and kind of what we can do within that classroom community to kind of improve or work on that charge. So just an example of that welcoming inclusion activity. So this is a link for our Padlet. Just a reminder, the password to get into the Padlet is just capital MTSS, but it has all of the previous resources from other Coffee Connects, as well as recordings from previous Coffee Connects. If you guys have questions, things that you're maybe kind of hoping to gain, or possible topics for future Coffee Connects, we'd love to have you guys just add those in there into the Padlet. But again, something that will just always be available to you to go back and grab any of those resources that we have shared. So what is SEBL? Again, just a couple of these first few slides we always like to start with as just good reminders of social emotional behavioral learning and just kind of that little review. So social emotional behavioral learning, really thinking about those social skills, those life skills, those skills that we really need to help us navigate life. They are those employability skills, those college, career, community readiness skills. That we really need to work to be intentional about teaching as well as modeling for our students. They're really what helps us to navigate life. And we'll get to our slide just kind of with our web with the different competencies and the skills within each of those competencies here in a little bit. Another just nice reminder when we're thinking about and we're talking about the alignment between SEBL and Pyramid and PBIS. So we all need those social emotional behavioral learning competencies and those skills that fall within in order to do those positive behavior expectations, in order to display those positive behaviors, but also those career readiness skills. So in order to be able to show, exhibit, and be able to practice those things. Somewhere along the line, SEL, so social emotional learning and behavior, got split, but we're really working to bring them back together, SEBL, because we know they are so much interconnected. We know that one really does affect the other. We know that students can't do things like handle disappointment or handle frustration or conflict with peers if they don't have those social emotional behavioral learning skills. They are not able to show those positive behaviors. Here is the web that I had mentioned just a couple slides ago that really outlines some of those skills within each of the competencies. And we like to share this visual again, so we can really think about those skills and how we might intentionally build those into our everyday classroom routines, into our instruction. And also embedding them within like our PBIS expectations and things like that. So they really are those skills that, like I had mentioned, help us to navigate life. They really ebb and flow throughout our life. It's really working to integrate them into what we're doing, how we're teaching those skills, how we're modeling those skills within our classroom, and really being explicit and doing that teaching really on purpose of those skills. Kind of moving into PBIS. So we did our overview of what is SEBL, but what is PBIS? So we have the definition here. So it is that evidence-based, that data-informed process that works to increase student achievement. It works to increase school attendance, and it works to increase academic success while also decreasing those challenging student behaviors. And really that overall goal of PBIS is to create those positive environments where all students can achieve those behavioral outcomes, those positive behavioral outcomes. PBIS is really something that works to equip students to follow those behavioral expectations that we have identified within our school setting, and really working to enhance that academic engaged time and just their overall learning potential. It's really about having that common language and that common approach for instruction, for intervention, and for support. Next, we have just kind of a nice visual that really shows PBIS as that behavior component of MTSS, where we're really thinking about the continuum of school-wide instructional and positive behavior supports. So overall, that purpose of PBIS is to really establish that school climate where that appropriate behavior is just the norm. We have those 3 tiers. So as you can see on this visual, for students with that range of prevention and individual strategies, as it's outlined here, just kind of on this visual here. So it's really about how we organize and how we systematize those resources, and how we're really working to provide support to students early on. We want to use those strategies that will really help support students in identifying those positive behaviors, but also helping staff as well, again, with that common language. PBIS is really about checking for that fidelity to make sure students and those systems that we are building are successful. And it really works to integrate both those academic and then those social emotional outcomes. Next, we have what is the pyramid model. So as you guys can see here, so the pyramid model really is that framework of evidence-based practices that really work to promote those social emotional skills, that social emotional competence, working to prevent the social emotional delays, and then addressing challenging behaviors of our young children. There is a link for the NCPMI website on this site or on this slide as well. And it is just a great resource with tons and tons of free resources for honestly students of all ages to support that social emotional behavioral learning. And I'll let Amy kind of jump in to share a little bit more just about that site or anything else about the pyramid model.
And I've got weird sun. Sorry, I'm trying to decide where the best spot is to sit. But NCPMI has awesome resources that are printable and ready to go to use. They have resources to send home for families in 8 languages, I believe. So just lots of really easy to access materials, ideas, activities, all sorts of things. Yeah, I think you covered everything else.
Perfect. Thanks, Amy. And I forgot to even introduce you. So Amy is one of our early childhood MTSS facilitators, and you serve Region 1, correct?
Yes. Yep. For ESUs 4, 5, and 6, and LPS.
Awesome. Thank you. And feel free to jump in as we continue to just share some information about that alignment. So next, we just have just that nice reminder about MTSS. So MTSS really is the definition of that educational framework for continuous improvement, for problem solving, for decision making. And it really works to offer that meaningful and effective way to organize our instruction and to organize our interventions so that we can help improve outcomes for all students. And then we really like this next slide as well. So MTSS, we have PBIS, we have pyramid. It really is how we organize and systematize those academic, those behavioral, and those social emotional supports that we're providing to students. And then lastly, just a nice reminder that we don't want the systems that are there to support students to be operating in silos. We know that they are very much interconnected, they are very much intertwined, and we want them working together so that we can best support students. So as you can see here, we have behavior, we have social emotional, we have mental well-being, we have academics, we have climate. We want all of those pieces really working together in order to support our students. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Jill. I'm going to talk about how we do that. So when we think about systematizing SEBL and PBIS and Pyramid, which already are, systems and programs and frameworks in and of itself, but how do we make sure we are doing this in a way that really is best for our educators and best for our students and families also? Ideally, we want that to start. So Pyramid to start in our communities and our districts, from those, those itty bitty littles, and then work all the way up through our early elementary, middle, and high school. And so how do we keep that system flowing with common language, common expectations? And so, really within Nebraska MTSS, the way that we believe that would work best is through our essential elements. And I see we have Mary Jo Macahose on here who is one of our NeMTSS consultants. And so if she feels the need, Mary Jo, to jump in at any point to help build on what we were talking about, I welcome you to do that as well. So on this slide, you guys have the PDF. These are all live links that will take you to the website to learn a little bit more about each of these and the impact of them and how they build upon one another to support our system building. We're going to go through them each a little bit. And really, I mean, they are what they are at face value, but we're going to break that down into, you know, what does that mean for aligning PBIS, SEBL, and Pyramid? So when we think about shared leadership, really we want a representative team that plans to address. So we have SEBL needs of all, knowing that Pyramid and PBIS, you know, Pyramid really is the PBIS for little kids and fully embed social emotional learning in what they're doing. PBIS is our B part of SEBL. So we want teams that are having these conversations, like Jill said, breaking down those silos. These should be talking about all of those pieces in their meeting and in their time together. So we know that social emotional behavioral learning starts at birth. So when thinking about your teams, do you have that representation across grade and content level on your leadership team? One of the concerns we frequently hear is that there's that gap, you know, from our early childhood, preschool, to elementary, to middle, to high school. So how are we making sure that there is representation from each of those levels on that district team to make sure that that gap doesn't happen, that is more seamless for our students and families, and we keep that learning and support going from the very beginning? We have to be intentional about deciding who we have on our teams. And representation shared leadership doesn't mean that everyone is on the team, just that we have representation from all of the different levels. So we need to have administrators on that team. They have to be invested. They have to believe that this is the process and this is what is best. And so if we have that leadership saying like, yes, this is important, then the rest of the team can follow along with that. So we need to have teachers, again, representing all grade and content areas. If there's a preschool, are they a part of those teams and are they sharing in that leadership? And sometimes, so we have, you know, our PBIS teams, our SEBL teams, our, some districts are still doing MTSS A and MTSS B. And so how do we bring all of those together and have that representation? So you can still be working on your, you know, your focus, but each of those people needs to have a seat at the larger table as well to have those conversations. It's also important to have those various support staff included. So, you know, your mental health staff, so your counselors, your school psychs, school social workers, if you have them, including those other support staff. So paraeducators, bus drivers, your secretary. Their secretaries have so much knowledge about your students and their families and the community and what is going on in the building. And so do they have a seat at the table to share what they know as well? Can you bring in that community voice? You know, helping make that collaboration between home and community. Can you have the parents? Are there parents that are represented on your team? Not only do we want their input as like what are they experiencing, but also they are talking to the other parents. They are a part of the community and talking to families about what they're experiencing. And so they can bring in that piece of the puzzle, not just their experience, but what are they hearing from others? And I recently heard about, so there were some feedback groups for some things happening in a district. And so there were some educators, some teachers who came and gave their feedback as teachers, but they were also parents of students in the community. And so then they were giving feedback. They were at those meetings as well. So just considering in there, do the parents who are not educators feel safe to express their concerns if they have those educators there in those meetings? So thinking through some of those things when you get to that point, but it had just recently come up, so I did want to share that. And then last but not least, consider having those youth as members on your teams. Empowerment starts with having a seat at those tables, and everything we're doing and everything we talk about and all of these things are for our students. And so are we having their voice available as well to talk about what are they experiencing, and these things we're putting in place, does this even make sense, and is this meeting the needs of the students that we are trying to reach? So here's our MTSS graphic on teaming. So we have that district leadership team fully represented if we can, as much as we can. We know that looks different in our smaller districts versus some of our bigger districts. But then making sure that someone from the district leadership team is also sitting on those building leadership teams, and then breaking down to those collaborative teams, those grade level, content level PLCs, and then having that full representation on those student support teams. So again, that everyone's perspective, everyone who has a piece of the puzzle, some information, what lens are they seeing things through? Are those people represented to make sure that we are providing the best support possible for our students and our families? And are we building our best system to support that as well? So Jill had mentioned a district she's working with. They have their district leadership team, which has all of those individuals represented, but then they have identified what focus they want. So some might be looking really at the SEBL, and some might be looking at PBIS, and some really feel passionate about the academics. So they are having those conversations and making sure those conversations are being brought to the district team and then to these other levels as well. So different ways to set that up, but really the key points that we want to get across is key points, having that representation from all the different areas. And then these shouldn't be 14 teams talking about different things in your district or your building, that these conversations about behavior, about social emotional learning, about academics, about that whole child should be happening in the same meetings to get that whole piece of the puzzle, to make sure we're not missing things and that we're not just putting out effort to support our students that really isn't getting the bigger picture.
Hey, Emily, real quick on that
Yep.
last slide. I just wanted to real quick point out those arrows going back and forth between those teams. That really is what makes this work. And that is the communication, collaboration, and partnerships essential element there, alive and well. And so as you're considering what your teams look like, you know, making sure that you have some sort of structures in place to allow that communication to happen back and forth is just another key point to consider with this shared leadership element and teaming.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary Jo. I knew you'd have good things to add in today. So thinking about communication, collaboration, and partnership, we need that two-way communication. And here we have home to school, and really it is not just home to school. It is across all of those levels. So not only do you need to be sharing out what is decided and what you are rolling out, but also being able to take in that communication from all of your partners as well. Having your families engaged as partners. If you were on our family engagement, we really went in depth with some strategies for this. But what are those ways to do that? So please go back and watch our Coffee Connect if you missed that one or are looking to booster that piece in your school or your district. Having those community stakeholders included. And again, that intentional communication with all staff. So having that plan to share out the information to everyone, not just a few select, and how does that happen? Thinking about parents and families. I already touched on that piece. I think that is all I have to say on that. I was trying to skim my notes. So sorry, Mary Jo or Jill or Mackenzie, please add in anything else. But really, I mean, what it comes down to is having those open avenues for building those partnerships, for that communication, for wanting to collaborate. Again, you know, our schools are in place for our students and our families and our community. So are we having the ability, are they having the ability to have a say in what is happening? When we think about social emotional behavioral learning, you know, that again includes that pyramid and PBIS. When we are looking just on the smaller level in the classroom, we have those lessons that are varied in frequency, length, content, and materials. That cooperative and project-based learning, it's integrated into our academic content. We'll talk a little bit about that, and that adult modeling. Because again, if our adults cannot practice and model and have the social emotional behavioral learning skills, we can't expect our students to have them. We look wider at our school-wide, doing some of those campaigns, having our rules and expectations. So our, you know, our PBIS matrices and things like that. And then those prevention programs as well. And within our community, what kinds of extracurriculars can we get our students involved in? Service learning projects and student organizations. So one, how do we help build the community from our school within? And then how do we have those partnerships within the community to make those larger connections? And talking about student voice and choice, we want to continuously solicit and incorporate student feedback, engage students in studying and assessing their school, including that authentic representation. So how can we include them on our teams? Again, what we are doing is what we believe is best for students. So we need to hear from students whether they believe it is truly best for them, knowing that some of that comes with a grain of salt, but giving them a place to advocate for themselves. Inviting students to discussions related to their own learning, student-led advocacy, student-led conferences, student-led IEPs, and consider young people as stakeholders and partners in their schools. And so on the right-hand side, you can see a continuum of how that might work. At minimum, we want to include our students in surveys, as data sources. So Jill or Mackenzie will talk a little bit later about different data sources, but using that data to help inform what we're doing. We want to, at minimum, be doing that. Even better if we can have focus groups to bring in our students and ask them some questions and have some conversations. Above that is those student-led conferences. So how can they, have really an ownership in their learning, and then having, even on the highest level, those student advisory committees, having them sit on our leadership teams and have them be a part of those conversations at the highest level. And then getting the community involved. So just those community-based experiences, partnering with organizations that employ high school age youth. What kind of student service projects can our students be doing for our organizations, especially those organizations that support our community? So building that connection and then some volunteer opportunities. And then how do we engage with those community organizations that provide services and supports to our students and families, those out of school time providers, summer programs, enrichment programs, tutoring and mentorship, our parks and athletic departments and leagues, and then churches and social services organizations. So again, building the communication, collaboration, and partnership within our community to provide the best for all. And then looking at evidence-based practices. When Jill was giving our the definition earlier, PBIS is an evidence-based practice. Pyramid organizes these evidence-based practices. And then social emotional learning, while in it of itself is not an evidence-based practice, there are lots of evidence-based social emotional learning programs out there that schools are adopting and using. And so when you have your shared leadership and your communication, collaboration, and partnerships, you should be having these conversations and determining what are the best evidence-based practices for your schools and your districts based on your data, based on these conversations, based on the input from students and parents and community and educators. So really, these are all building upon each other. So if you've been with us for a while, you might have seen this slide before. In Nebraska, we don't have specific social emotional learning standards. Some states do, we don't, but they really are woven within our Nebraska standards. And so we have a couple of them here for you: English language arts for high school, social studies middle, and physical education for kindergarten. You can't see the standard here, but they are pulled directly from our Nebraska standards and then tied to the competency that they match. So while they are not standalone, they are interwoven through everything you do. And so those pieces are there, and it's being intentional about just putting the language to it when you are teaching to these. On the other side, we have lots of resources for you and self-assessment. So are you implementing social emotional learning into your classroom? What does that look like? Are there some gaps or areas of growth that you could add to that you might be missing currently? And some sample lesson plans as well. And then school mental health, SEL competencies and practices, a handout on that also. And we have these instructional practices that support social emotional behavioral learning. And we think when people think about curriculum, when educators think about curriculum, they think about curriculum when they think about social emotional learning, but really there is that piece of it, but it also is about how they embed it into their instruction and into their classrooms. And so there is pushback because educators, rightfully so, have a lot on their plate. And so they're like, I can't do one more thing. I'm already tapped out. I'm doing everything I can. And I like this because it shows that really most educators are already doing these things in their classroom and in their instruction. They are doing student-centered discipline. they are focusing on their teacher language and making sure it is supportive and safe and inclusive for their students, giving the students responsibility and choice, being warm and supportive, that cooperative learning. So really all of these instructional practices are things that most educators are already doing that help support the growth of social emotional behavioral learning in our students, but also help support the growth of social emotional learning in our educators. So a couple good handouts and links on here for that.
All right, and I'm going to wrap us up today. We have 3 more essential elements. The next one is building capacity and infrastructure for implementation. So this is really all about what are we doing for our educators to help build them up, to help them gain knowledge, gain the skills, gain the confidence and ability to go out and do. So when we think about how are we doing this, we really want to use implementation science. We want to be very thoughtful in our planning and our rollout of things, and not just dive into doing, but really kind of take a step back and see, like, where are we going? How are we going to get there? And taking into account the fact that it might be slow. There might be some small steps that we need to take, and we might not see results overnight, but if we do it very effectively and very thoughtfully, hopefully the end result is a lot better than where we started. We want to think about, a lot of times we talk about buy-in, gaining staff buy-in, wanting people to jump on the ship, if you could say, but we want to also reframe that to collective ownership. So how are we getting people to hop on board? By getting them to want to do this as a team, by having some ownership and seeing their stake in what they do really matters with what we're doing as a whole system, a whole school. When we think of collective ownership, there's a couple different things, as you can see on this slide. We have our high quality professional learning. We want to provide some high quality stuff for our staff to learn and to build up their confidence and their skills to be able to go out and really provide that high quality instruction to their students. When we think about that infrastructure for implementation, we want to create a climate, an environment where our staff feel open, they feel like they have a voice to share, that they feel safe to be able to share maybe disagreements, or they have that norm as a school or a district to be able to share your thoughts, your opinions, to be able to ask for support, to really feel safe when building up those systems and within those training environments. And then being able to have the opportunity as a staff member to evaluate your practices, to find opportunities, to step back and see where can we implement this SEBL or this behavior thing, as we're talking about the rollout of social emotional behavior learning. Emily touched on it a little bit, but a lot of times when we think of SEL or SEBL, we think, oh, yep, we're going to do our second step curriculum, or we're going to move this world. And the curriculums are an important part, but we really want to think further beyond that and think about how can we embed this into our system with what we're doing. When we think of providing that training and that professional development, we want to think of these 3 different things. On the next slide, we have strong leadership. When we think of strong leadership, we think of, yes, our building leaders, our administrators, our district leaders, but also, like, what about those leaders that aren't necessarily leaders by title, but leaders by trade, or they're those natural teacher leaders that might have a lot of connectedness, a lot of pull, a lot of they're kind of in the know in your teachers, in your buildings, I guess, because those teachers are very powerful when it comes to changes. If you're able to build up those relationships and have collective ownership from the teacher leaders that are leaders by trade and not leaders by title, we can really see that it helps build that collective ownership to roll out some of those systematic changes. And giving all staff the opportunity to be able to come to the table and make connections and be part of these changes. We think of professional learning. We want to be strategic and specific about our opportunities. I know there's so many different things we can learn about. There's changes take time. We're adopting new curriculums. We're always so busy in the schools. So what kind of professional development can we provide with the time given that's really going to get us and our staff built up for what we're wanting to implement? And then taking it a step beyond that with the coaching, because we know professional development is great. It can be an amazing experience. You can learn some stuff, but if there's not that follow through, that coaching, that support in between different learning opportunities, it's generally not as effective as if we're providing some coaching and some support throughout the implementation process. And we want to always align our professional development with our continuous improvement goals and thinking about where are we going, where do we want to go, and considering that staff voice and getting their ownership by thinking about what moves their hearts, what moves their thinking, and ultimately that will lead to actions. But sometimes we got to step back and think about that before we jump in. A lot of schools have a PBIS system up and running. SEL is, as we kind of talked about earlier, is kind of separated from that behavior side, but we really want to come together. And so if you do have your PBIS system and your teachers are familiar with it and what it is and why they're doing it, how can you make a plan for looking at that system and embedding some common language or some commonalities with those SEL components? So this is an example of that. Behavior matrices are pretty common. You might see them posted in the hallways, in the lunchroom, etc. But you can embed some of those learning skills that you're learning. So here's an example of using your breathing technique, or being aware of my body, or you can add some of those competencies, those skills that were in the SEL web or that you might be using within your social emotional curriculum into your behavior matrix. And so they're seeing those skills, they're practicing those skills, but then they're seeing how it can be applied in various settings, because you can practice these skills in your SEL block and that's great. But really the ultimate goal of the whole social emotional learning is to create those college, career, community ready people, and they won't be able to do that if they're only practicing it in their one advisory block where they're learning. A lot of times with these systems, we think of a triangle initially, which the triangle and the layered continuum of support is very important component of MTSS, PBIS, all those system things, but we also need to remember the foundational work of all the essential elements that we've talked about today on top of this essential element. But we really want to focus on all of the components, with the continuum of support being just a part. You all know the triangle. Tier 1 is for all learners. Hopefully it meets the needs of most people. And then moving up in intensity and duration with our targeted and our intensified supports. And that would be the layered continuum of support. This next slide here has some different examples. It's not an end-all be-all list. It's just a list that we've created. It's important though to remember that your triangle and your supports and your services and the way you do things might look different than the way that the people down the street do things, because our buildings all have different needs and we want to provide supports and services based on the needs that are being shown in our buildings. PBIS again uses these ticketing systems. That is a very small component of the whole PBIS system, but also very familiar with a lot of people implementing. So an example of how you could align some of the SEBL language into your school-wide ticketing system is by providing some of the same language. If you're targeting maybe those CASEL competencies, you like the tiger praise example here, you could say the student showed great teamwork, and then do an example of they're using their relationship skills and their social awareness when working in a group. embedding some of those skills that you're targeting, but then also linking it to what you're already doing. So it's not an added thing, but it's an embedded thing. The positive note home is another example where you could check whatever they're doing, write a little personal note, and then that creates conversation among the families to have some of that common language as well. Database problem solving and decision making. Everything we do, we want to use the data. I think it's easy to say that we have a good pull on our school. We know where we're feeling, like things are going well, like things are great, or maybe things aren't so great, but the data doesn't lie. And so we have a lot of data in schools. So let's think about how we can use it, or maybe how we can lose it if we're not using it effectively. Use it or lose it. So then there's, again, I've mentioned before, data of different levels. So we can use data from a systems perspective. We can use data from a district or school, or even classroom grade teacher perspective, or from the students. And as we're using that data, we're engaging in the problem solving process to identify and analyze, and then make a plan, an action plan within our process, and then implement it, and then reflect and see how it went. I mentioned that we have a lot of different data sources. Here's some examples here. When making decisions based on data, I think it's also important to realize that we have a lot of data sources, and a lot of times, especially when we're talking about students, if we're seeing a student is missing a lot of school days, they might have lower grades, and they might be flagged on the screener, or they might have a lot of nurse visits. And so looking for that triangulation of data, and not basing our decisions based off of one data point, but how are we using all of the data collectively to make decisions and create plans to move forward. When we think of SEL or PBIS, a lot of times we think of adopting a curriculum or making a cool acronym or behavior expectations, but it goes so much further beyond that, which is why we wanted to go over all of the essential elements today. We really want to be thoughtful about how are we using that data? What data do we have? How are we bringing all of the voices to the table? How are we training up staff? And how are we pulling from evidence-based practices and using that in our everyday, and not just we selected a curriculum, we're doing SEL, or we have some cool behavior expectations, that's PBIS. It really goes far, far beyond that. And it dives into these essential elements. So as you're looking at your systems and you're building your systems, how are we looking at each of these essential elements to help build a strong system that will support students and be more effective and last longer and be more sustainable over time. This slide here has a lot of stuff on it, but we added a bunch of different questions for each essential element. And so if you're looking at incorporating SEBL into your MTSS, or if you have a PBIS system and that's maybe you're in, these are some questions you could consider. You can, obviously there's a lot of stuff, so maybe thinking about one part or one essential element, and then starting there and building up that before taking it all on. I know there's a lot of stuff when building systems, but really just being thoughtful and being planful as you're moving forward. I know it's 9:15, so I don't want to take too much of your time, but I want to offer an opportunity for people to ask questions. If anyone has questions or comments about aligning PBIS, SEBL pyramid all together into the system we use. I'll give some time to after this, but if you can't stay, or if you don't have any questions, please feel free to go. We would love to get your feedback. If you want a certificate of completion, if you fill out the exit ticket, it will send you, there's an option to send you a certificate. And yeah, so feel free to ask any questions. You can put them in the chat. You can also reach out to us later if you want to dive a little bit deeper into your district or school more specifically.
Mackenzie, did you want to move to the optimistic closure?
Yes. Just thinking about what you've learned, reviewing the essential elements, think personally about a step you'll take to strengthen the alignments between your system, or if you're at an ESU level, maybe how can you help facilitate conversations around aligning those systems. You're free to put it in the chat. You can write it down so you remember to come back to it later, or you can share out. Obviously, you can unmute. We would love to hear your real voices. And then it's crazy to believe we're almost all the way through October. We only have 2 Coffee Connects left this semester. November, we're talking about SEBL for everyone. So it's not just for our mental health, our school psychs, counselors, administrators. It's really for all staff. It's for our cafeteria staff. It's for our bus drivers. It's for our paraeducators, all of our support staff. So that's our focus in November, and December, we're targeting student voice. So we'll stay on a little bit. If anyone has questions, you're also more than welcome to reach out to us. We really appreciate everybody and taking time this morning to come and learn with us. And we hope you have a great day.